Hello, baby.
I was crazy once.
I'm thinking of a number.
Marty, I
Yeah,
invented
Doc?
a time machine.
Whoa! What are you planning on doing with this time machine?
I'm gonna go back to the future.
Are we talking about Back to the Future again?
That's right, guys. What's up? It's Down Direction, a Menswear podcast, the Enthusiast podcast.
That's right, we're the enthusiast cast.
Yeah, Enthusiast. And we're going back to the future once more. This is your part 2 bonus episode. Well, the bonus episode about part 2.
That's right. It's not part 2 of episode of the first one. I know that it's not
the movie called part 2. Yeah.
Yeah. It should have been called Back to the Future episode 1. I feel like Lucas.
Okay, yeah.
Well, Spielberg, they weren't involved in
George
this one
Lucas.
necessarily, but they should have just told Zemeckis, it's like, listen, we got a new thing going. We're done with sequels. We're now doing episodes. And he's like, isn't that TV? And they say, shut up. I'm gonna go.
It's gonna be as if it was
invent
like
dinosaurs.
TV.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
Stan
Steven Spielberg
Winston.
invented dinosaurs for that movie.
I think this is a real comment. I think it's cool that like Spielberg has like and Stan Winston animatronics, like they kind of like made such a distinctive version of a dinosaur like forever. Like there is like that T. And I think nowadays, right, the T-Rex doesn't exactly look like that, you know, but there is such a
It's got
distinctive
feathers.
look.
Yeah.
Well, not just that. I feel like the ridges, like just like the design of it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like when you watch like those stupid ass, hey, not stupid. When you see like those like scientific like TikToks.
Yeah, there's
where they
fucking
do, like,
dumbass scientific videos. I hate scientists, man.
You're not
Yeah,
movie
creation
guys.
is the key here. No, like when they do those you know, like renderings of dinosaurs, like they look like more like, I don't know, anatomically or scientifically correct, but like the movie, the Jurassic Park T-Rex looks and also sounds so cool. Like I mean, obviously
Yeah.
the sound is we will never know what a T-Rex sounds like, but it better
It could
be
have sounded
whatever.
really lame.
Apparently, they said that I don't know if it's real, but that they analyzed like the vocal passages, and it sounds like creepy. It sounds like a hollow breathing thing, which I guess I don't know, because like you know how in like real life, right? Like lions don't like really like roar or whatever. Like
Yeah.
it's like tiger, like they use like tiger like sounds.
Yeah.
But you know, hey, when I get to heaven, I'm gonna ask God about that dinosaur stuff.
That's your first question.
Shout
I
outs
think,
to
you know-
the 2000 Disney animated film Dinosaur, by the way.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, where it's not a T-Rex, it's a carnosaur.
Carnosaur?
Carnosaur.
I think
Is that what it's called?
both. I think both are carnosaur.
Carnotaurus.
Okay, Carnosauria is a group of extinct predatory dinosaurs. Oh, okay. Wait, hold on. I can't.
Okay.
Okay, these. There's a thing called the Tyrannotitan. What the hell is?
Whoa! Is that real or is that from like Jurassic World Embassy
No,
or
this
some
is
movie that I haven't
this is
seen?
a real thing.
Jurassic World Dead Reckoning.
This is a real.
Yeah.
This is a real. Okay, it looks like an Allosaurus. Hey,
I want to
welcome
know.
back to the
I just
Dinosaur
kind of
Podcast.
said that, but now I really do want to know what a movie called Jurassic World: Embassy would look like. What do you think the plot of that one is?
Jurassic World: Embassy.
Embassy.
Yeah.
Like there's like a dinosaur embassy on every country now because they've.
Oh,
they create-
okay. I
yeah.
thought we were doing I thought we were going for a Jurassic World 2 Fallen Kingdom where it becomes like a slasher film in a mansion and it's like a bunch of raptors are loose in like an embassy.
Oh, so it's like
Like a real
it's-
like a little like Die Hard situation or something like that.
Okay, I like that one too. I like that one. It'll be like Dinosaur Benghazi, basically.
Yeah, what is it? The 12 Soldiers? What is it? What's the movie
13,
called?
13
What?
hours.
13 Hours,
Yeah.
starring
Secret
Chris Hemsworth
Soldiers of Benghazi.
of Benghazi.
Features
right.
John
Does Hillary Clinton have
Krasinski.
does
A
Hillary Clinton have
cameo
a
in
cameo
there.
in that one?
Where it's like you just see the
Where she
back of her
deletes-
head and she's like, "Yeah, kill them all! Like
on.
make sure they're all dead."
Let me look that up.
Let me looking. Siri, look up Hillary Clinton.
Yeah. Do you remember?
Hey,
do you remember
Siri.
how George
Yeah.
Bush had a cameo in the first Transformers movie?
No, I don't
Yeah,
remember
this
that.
is real. I remember, like, so there's, like, a scene where it's, like, yeah, the dinosaurs are attacking, and they cut to the White House, and you never see his face, but you see, like, him, like, watching cartoons or something, and he has, like, Texas socks on, and he's like, we gotta go kill those robots now, or something, or, like, they're
Oh,
like,
yeah, okay, I
sir,
do
we've
remember
got robots attacking, and, you know, Mark Wahlberg isn't around yet, but he'll be here in a couple movies to fix this.
Well, that's like the future, kind of, right? Like,
Yeah. I don't. I
uh,
think I've only seen 2 of those movies. I don't know the continuity of these Transformers flicks.
they're crazy. I'll just
Yeah.
say, hey Siri, look up college Hillary Clinton, please.
That's right.
Oh
Should we say
man.
what we're actually talking about? Because
Hey,
we're
guys,
still
this is
misleading
crazy.
our audience a little bit.
Misdirection. What's that from again?
Oh, it's from the sitcom Misdirection, which is about a lady who either
Who
directs
works for
people
Google
or
Maps?
misdirects people. Yeah, she works for Maps.
Yeah.
She works for
Maps?
Maps. Yeah, just the
Yeah.
concept of Maps.
Yeah,
Big
MapQuest
maps.
still around.
Yeah.
Welcome everyone. Welcome to Sound Direction, a mentor podcast about the stuffiness for enthusiasts. A little bit of a mouthful
That's
there.
right.
I am one of your hosts, Ethan M. Wong,
I'm Spencer DSO.
And I'm MJ.
and we are talking to you today not about Back to the Future. I mean, hey, keep asking for number 2, and we'll cover it on the bonus feed. So you'll have to pay for it at patreon.com/sounddirection.
Twofer.
But a twofer. Hey, sorry, got a twofer. You can do that on me.
That's right.
We're talking to you today about menswear revivals. Basically, blank does blank. I think kind
Yeah.
of that's kind of what we're doing. I mean, and also like kind of like how vintage comes back, subculture, all that kind of stuff. We call it menswear revivals, but it's probably going to go into a lot more than that in the hour or so that we have for you guys here. It's been a long time since we've we've never talked about this. I mean, I think
We've never talked about this.
I mean, if you're into
It's come up.
menswear, yeah, if you're into menswear at all, especially if you're into vintage, one of the concepts, I guess I'm just introducing it right now, is the concept of blank does blank. Like 70s does 30s, 80s does 40s, or in some cases, like we kind of do a call forward with like 30s does 70s, and
Yeah.
it's a helpful thing. Well, first off, it's because things come back. It's because
Believe it or not.
but yeah, Ripley.
Yeah.
A lot of fashion is cyclical. People say that all the time, but once you're into menswear and once you collect vintage, it becomes more about what details come back, what ideas of previous eras come back, and as you do the stuff, you start to see it, and because you can't always buy the true vintage stuff, or maybe it's not accessible to you, or maybe you just like other things too that are maybe not the specific pieces of vintage. You get another era's interpretation of it, and so that's kind of like the primer for this, because when you get into vintage menswear and there's the 30s, a lot of 70s stuff kind of looks like the 30s. And we'll get into maybe why, or our conjectures as to why in a second. But it's a very common thing among vintage menswear enthusiasts, and I think today it's also kind of happening with TikTok reviving back a bunch of stuff.
I mean, it's like it's the same kind of thing about there's people talk about 30-year nostalgia cycles, 20-year nostalgia cycles, 40-year. No one can seem to agree how long these things last. I think when the concept of a nostalgia cycle was originally proposed, it was something on like 150-year scale, which is kind of funny to think about now. But yeah, you're definitely seeing
Laver's
this.
law.
That's right. But now you are seeing this with. I mean, I think one of the things we're going to get into the episode is it's kind of interesting now because with the internet and kind of the lack of like mass culture that you had 40, 50 years ago, I feel like it's hard to say that there is one specific revival going on right now, because I don't know, like the people are into everything. Like I think the big one is probably like Y2K, like early 2000 styles. But obviously if you open up TikTok, Instagram, whatever, check out what the Zoomers are up to. You're going to see guys that are, doing 70s stuff. There's still people doing like 80s stuff, 90s stuff. Like it's all happening at the same time.
Yeah.
It's all happening everywhere all at once. That's the name of that movie.
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really interesting because you have to think about why this happens, and from a I guess a cursory glance, or for mainly a collector's standpoint, right? It's just nice to know what eras did what designers are looking at. That way, you can maybe if you're dressing after a certain era, which we do in a sense. It's helpful to know these details, to kind of say, okay, well, I can't afford a 1930s belt back, but maybe a 70s one will get me through that
Or I mean,
fix.
and yet not even just if you're trying to dress specifically vintage, but if there's like a brand that you really like and they're out of your price range, but it's like, oh, they're just kind of doing like 80s Armani or like 70s, like Ralph Lauren and something like that, then you could just go to the original and get it for probably a little bit cheaper.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But as you do that, then you start to figure out why people like to do this stuff, why these things kind of come around. And of course, we are not sociologists. We don't have the answers here. We have a handful of articles that might point us toward the answer that will satisfy us. But it's interesting to think about because, at the end of the day, this is all about how we connect with clothes. And the hope, if anything, is that you find what you like and you stick with it for as long as possible. But of course, the fact that, as Spencer said, everything is concurrently happening, it can be kind of hard to figure out what you like, and it might be even more tempting nowadays to just move into the next thing that people like.
The next level.
But this revival thing is a relatively new phenomenon, right? Not like clothing for a long time is functional, and also we didn't want to own old clothes, not just because of like status stuff. I mean, maybe I'm going too far here, but of course back in the day, old clothes are dirty, and so if someone had lived in them or died in them, you wouldn't want to own them.
I mean, not necessarily, because clothing used to be really, really expensive before mass
I guess that's also
manufacturing.
true, man. Hand-me-downs.
A lot of people, would make stuff at home, and this is getting like pre 20th century, even like pre 19th century a little bit. So we're going way back. But even into the 19th century, people would still wear clothes for a really, really long time. Because as you did say, they were functional, and it's like people couldn't afford to get a new set of clothes every year, every couple years, or every season. However, Shein wasn't a thing back then. You had to, if you were paying for a coat, it wouldn't be like 12 cents. And so people would literally... like their clothes would be like handed down like through generations. Like, you might have something that your grandfather wore or something. And sometimes people would like modify them to fit better with the current styles. And you even see that like later on into the 20th century where there were things where it's like,
you had slim lapels. You would taper
slim
trousers.
lapels. Or it's like there would even be people who would take double-breasted suits and like, in the 50s and 60s, when that was falling out of style, they would take their earlier double-breasted suits and get them turned into single-breasted suits. And I've seen a couple of those in like vintage stores and they look crazy. I don't know why people did that. But
people had to have noticed, right?
Yes, yeah. I mean, because it had like the completely square, squared off front.
Yeah.
It was really weird. But that started to change in the 20th century again as clothing got cheaper. People had a little bit more money. Mass manufacturing, changed a lot of things. But the birth of kind of like secondhand clothing or vintage clothing as a fashion thing rather than just it being pure like thrift, as in you're trying to save money, started around the 50s, where I'm trying to pull up that article, scroll through our notes.
The raccoon coats.
Oh, here we go. Yeah, raccoon. So raccoon coat, but I'm trying to find the name of the couple. But some like Greenwich Village, damn hipsters. They found old 1920s raccoon coats in their like parents' attic or something like that, or and they started selling them to their friends. And that's kind of how it got started. It was like kind of with this like 20s revival that happened in the 50s. And then after that, the rest of the story.
The rest is history.
That's right.
Yeah, because we're here. We are the result of that
happening.
I mean,
speaking of the 50s too, I mean, there was that famous photograph set from Life magazine about like the Prohibition Party in the
Yeah.
50s, where people either were wearing true vintage, which you can tell, or people were trying to approximate it with what they had, and it was like it's kind of funny when you look at those images because it's kind of like it's not exactly 20s. It almost gets kind of like teens-ish in some
Yeah.
stuff, where like people, I guess bowler hats are kind of 20s also.
Well,
but
it's like, it's the same equivalent as like if you went to like an 80s party now and everyone was wearing like bright neon workout gear and shit like that. It's like that, what, like the things that they're wearing technically were around in the 20s. And yeah, you could see, because it's like
I'm specifically referring to the photo of the guy wearing like a plaid jacket with gun check pants, which
oh yeah,
feels very like teens, like, you know what I mean? Like,
because I think, I imagine that a lot of these people were like, based on their ages, they were probably just like kids in the 20s or even like just babies. And so, I don't know, I just imagined that they were just wearing stuff that their parents wore or whatever based on their childhood
I mean, they might be
memories.
wearing exactly what their parents were wearing,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
It's only like, what, 20, 30 years ago or whatever? But yeah, I think it's really funny, like, when you see, like, everyone's wearing, like, straw boaters and, like, flat caps. It's funny because, like, the things that you would see at a Midwestern Gatsby party where people maybe, aren't wearing true vintage, like, people are just wearing that, like kind of like really approximations, party city type of stuff.
I do
I
like the guy
this...
in the tuxedo with the spectators. Those are pretty cool.
Yeah, because you just assume that that's what they would do, right? Like they would wear, like these two-tone derbies.
But those are like very 50s spectators right there.
Yeah. Because they're the ones where the entire vamp is one color. It's a derby. It's not like a wingtip or anything, where you would normally see the two-tone nature in that. You see someone dressed like Charlie Chaplin. Again, a lot of people wearing. Oh, I love the guy wearing like the short jacket, but with like the big 8-panel cap, and then like the the ascot
that's cool.
thing, kind of like a movie director, or like Jodhpurs kind
Yeah,
of.
because he's got the riding pants on too.
Yeah, that's really. I mean, yeah. And so it's kind of funny, right? Like this idea of like a nostalgia party where you do like like today with like 90s party, or I guess we're gonna have. It's already happened. Like Y2K warehouse.
Y2K parties
stuff.
are definitely happening.
Yeah, and so it's like it's funny that you kind of have that. And people in the 50s also had this too. I mean, people, the Singing in the Rain takes place during the
Yeah, it takes place around like
the
1927.
Sound for movies, yeah. And they definitely dress like in service of that, like they're not wearing 50s style clothing, but like you see Gene Kelly wearing like, again, oh yeah, he's wearing a white jacket, sports shirt with like a little ascot with riding pants and jodhpurs. You get some like, that's the director, but then you also get like crazy Argyle sweaters.
Yeah, and even though it's like they're, I don't know, it's styled very 20s. A lot of the suits are like super, like the
they're
suit
cut that way, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Or it's like the ties and stuff that they're wearing seem very 20s, but at the same time, and this is true with a lot of period pieces.
Films.
You've heard us talk about this. Like even that crazy Argyle sweater, or like the one that he's wearing in the Moses Supposes scene with it's just like the V-neck with the gray trousers. I could very easily see someone wearing that around like 1948 to 1952. They're like, on the one hand, they are things that people wore in the 20s, but they also were things that people wore in the 50s. And so I think that's another thing that we're going to talk about is with all these revivals, there's always a lot of influences from the time that things come back. One, because it's like, no, I don't know. Other than us, no one wants just straight up like old reproductions of shit.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I was gonna say, like, I mean, you've included some articles here where, like, like revivals, or when fashion comes back, it's never just a straight up send up, right? It's not just, we're not just doing that again. There's always going to be some kind of like modern sensibility or curation behind it, right? Like even when the 80s did the 40s, and they even revived like atomic fleck fabrics in the 80s, but of course, like you see jackets that have like a really low buttoning point, raglan sleeves on sport coats, and of course, like, and even then, even just apart from the clothing, like the guys are having like the flock of seagulls hair, like people also just like look different, like people's faces and hairstyles will still be in the modern day, or like a natural progression of how things go. even if the clothes maybe are sending up something else, but again, they're not a straight up reproduction. You know that when the '90s, even though the '90s looks really close to the '40s, and Spencer has a great article about like how like in the '90s like culture was kind of conservative. Um, I Love Lucy, all this kind of stuff, and you can see in the clothing where like in the '90s, right, like collar bars came back, really like nice, like parted hair was in. It wasn't. I mean, yes, there was a lot of like sex stuff, but like, it was definitely not as sexy as like the '80s were. And so, even if the '90s look really really close to the '40s with the abstract ties and thin belts, it still looks like discernibly '90s. Like there's something about
Yeah.
it that does not look like a photo from like 1944. Like it's still at like 1998 in some of these photos, and so like you can never really escape that. But it's interesting to see when people like when culture also kind of reinforces this. Like there was yeah, I guess in the 50s, a couple of like 20s nostalgia stuff, and of course in the
Yeah.
70s, lots of 1930s stuff. You had, I mean, quite famously, you had like Chinatown, you had The Great Gatsby, you
Yeah.
know,
That was a
and
big one.
yeah, I guess that's kind of like early 70s, like 19, like pre
Well,
1975, six or
yeah,
whatever.
because I don't know if we want to go in like chronological order through the decades, but yeah, really quick, it's like at least according my citing my sources here, this Fedora Lounge article.
Of people that are like us discussing this thing.
Yeah, but the people in that thread who were around in the 70s say that the biggest period of kind of like 30s nostalgia came in the late 60s and early 70s. I imagine it was like kicked off by like Bonnie and Clyde, which came out I think like 1967. And that
Beatty.
was like a massive, massive hit. There were a couple other movies, like They Shoot Horses, Don't They? I'm pretty sure it came out in the late 60s or
Oh
early
yeah,
70s.
with the dance, the depression
Yeah, the
dance competition thing.
exactly. Yeah, there's Paper Moon, which is a movie that we might talk about coming up. The Sting, like these things all came out like throughout the decade. But like as people in that thread were talking about, there was kind of this like 30s revival in culture, but in terms of like clothing and styling and stuff like that, it was mostly the early 70s where that was popular. However, belt back jackets and like jackets with like pleated pockets and all that stuff, those were sold like throughout the decades or throughout the decade, and most of the time when I see them, it seems like a more like late 70s thing than early 70s jacket. I know in like Ghostbusters, which came out in like what 83 or 84, like one of the characters wears like a belt back jacket, so I don't know if that's something that was just in wardrobe since the 70s or if those were still being sold in the 80s, but that belt backs came back for like the entire decade.
Yeah, I mean, you watch Raiders of the Lost Ark, and they also have Indy when he's in the professor outfit wearing a belt back suit. But it's not a 30s suit. It's definitely an 80 or like like a late 70s suit because you
No,
can tell by
exactly.
the lapels. But you can like at least the costumers kind of knew like this is like kind of what a guy in the
Yeah.
30s would wear, and it's funny because every time I do see a belt back or pleated pockets, obviously at a thrift store it is not from the 30s. It is always like an
No.
80s or 70s kind of thing.
But yeah, something else I think we're going to get into that I always think is interesting is like whenever these revivals happen, like sometimes there are like two different times, like like with the 70s, I think that there was a kind of a wave of 70s nostalgia in the 90s and early 2000s, and then later in the 2010s and stuff like that. But like, and you could say this too with like 80s nostalgia, early 2000s nostalgia, where the first wave is always pretty different than what comes afterwards, because it's like
Right.
people who were around then and have memories of that time.
They're still
Recalling
culturally relevant too, so
Yes.
they prevent it from being like fully adopted until that's why it takes a while. I
But
think.
it's like people who have like a connection and were there and like are pulling from specific memories, versus like when we get into the 70s or the 30s or whatever, we weren't there. Like we're not being like, oh yeah, I remember when I used to wear this, like for my school photos or prom, or whatever, we don't have that kind of cultural connection, so we're just pulling from wherever. Like, it's, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's I first started noticing this a lot with like, like specifically like the Y2K early 2000s nostalgia, because obviously we were around then. I remember, a few years ago, when it first started coming around, it was all from like Facebook memes that were like, only 90s babies remember the Rugrats and shit like that. But now it's, again, completely disconnected. It's from kids who were born in like 2004, like wearing this shit.
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe this is kind of going ahead, but I had like an epiphany moment regarding this whole thing yesterday. Shout out Coffee for inspiring me. But, I think one of the reasons why today is so ripe for revivals and everything, I think is due to TikTok, or more specifically, the mixture of clothing, visual mediums, and music. And back in when say for us, right, when we were into the 30s and 40s, right, like when we would get into it, in order to fully immerse yourself into that world, like you would have to go to vintage events, you would have to go to I guess, yeah, whatever, like modern sock hops or swing dancing halls, etc. Go to Dapper Day. And one of the things about Instagram, and I guess about TikTok and now Instagram, where you can add music to your posts, is that you can have like a self-contained vibe now in a piece of content. And so I think nowadays, kids are able to connect with something and fully have their expression, this piece of content be as if it's like a slice of that era. Obviously, back then kids didn't have phones to film themselves with, but, you have a bunch of guys wearing 70s stuff, and if you see them in public, like you just think like, oh, like when we were when we were younger and 18 years old and seeing other guys doing 70s or 40s stuff, you can see them on the street, but they're still interacting with like real life, right? Like you see it, but on Instagram, right, not just their room, but like now they're playing the music of that era of whatever teenagers that they're cosplaying as, basically, and it makes this kind of uncanny valley thing of like, and it's often like, it's not like they look bad. In fact, it's like really good, but it's like, it's so perfect. And the only thing that's making it separate is like this idea that they're filming themselves.
Yeah.
But I think that's something that's what's been so crazy, is that like they're able to, the whole thing, the whole revival of it has been, it's just so much more extensive and holistic compared to like it just being about like you just like this thing, like you are curating this like whole vibe. And I was gonna say that also ties to the fact where I think today we're seeing a lot more, like, I guess if cosplay is too strong a word, a lot more like direct, authentic send-ups versus like a blank does blank back, that we would see like before. Like, again, obviously the 90s, a lot of people in the 90s also like swing music, right? Or like a lot of like
there was that famous Gap commercial.
The famous Gap commercial, right? But it still felt like very 90s. But here it's like it's so authentic to that era. Like they really want to, like, even though as Michael in our Discord has said, like, even though it's still based on the zeitgeist, whatever was extremely popular, whatever it is, like, that we think is really tangible from that time, even though it's still like a very cursory thing, it's still done to like the biggest exponential degree. And that, I think, is something that we just don't really have. When you would see it before, it would be like a video interview from like the news, like, this couple lives like it's 1950, right? You would see that, but now it's like, it's it's kind of like, there's a little bit of like derision in those kind of videos. There's a little bit of like, these guys are weird, but now it's like we celebrate it because of just how much can go into it. Because now, when you look at them on TikTok, the whole thing is there, versus like, a like 2008 news crew in some like British person's flat, and they have like like a steam, like, a stove, and like, it doesn't seem as cringy now. I feel like you can celebrate it. And it goes with the 40s too, where you see people like when they play the music, and it just looks a lot cooler and cleaner and nicer. But I definitely think that plays a big part. Social media obviously plays a big part in this, but I think it's just because it's unprecedented.
Yeah,
it goes
goes
deeper down the iceberg, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, like, and I think I do this too, where, like, when I'm wearing, like, a 70s fit, or, I mean, it goes both ways. Like, if I'm listening to 70s music, sometimes it inspires a 70s outfit. But also, like, when I use TikTok. I don't, I just kind of post a little fit check every day. But when I'm wearing a 70s fit, it kind of just makes sense to, like, play a 70s song while I'm doing it. Or, like, I mean, okay, here's the thing. I'm not listening to it as I'm doing it, because I just walk in front of the camera and I cut out the awkward parts and then I put music in afterward. But I know plenty of people who, like, press play on their thing and then they kind of, like, vibe out to it. That's a little crazy for me. I'll just say that. But, but I think, like, if we're talking about for the future stuff too, I think when people see that, they just think that vibe's cool, and that might be even more of a direct lead into, like, following that era, because now you're seeing the whole thing, as opposed to right before, where, like, hipsters or so, if you dress in a certain era, you would have to put in, work, I guess, or you'd have to find yourself in that subculture to dress, to find that thing. But nowadays you can be like, well, I saw this really cool guy doing it, and so. Yeah, I think people being exposed to earlier decades is also being unprecedented compared to before. I just saw in research for this, research is in looking through TikTok, doing hashtag Y2K.
That's research.
But I think it's crazy, man. Like when they go like Y2K Inspo album, and it's like old catalogs, it's like old Nick Cannon photos, and like I know this hasn't hit like my For You page because it's like only like teenager fit check accounts, but like when you see like a kid wearing like a long like skateboarding beanie that goes down to like their eyebrows, and like a big baggy shirt, and like the big pants, and like, or they're wearing a white t-shirt with like a hoodie, they look like Max, not even Max Goof. They just look like some like cartoon from the 2000s, and I'm like, holy shit, that's crazy. And they're playing music. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember hearing this on the radio, back then, like some like Y2K, like hip hop or whatever.
Well, it's like, I don't know. I feel like a lot of the kids do a good job of like kind of replicating that look, but at the same time, I feel like I am seeing a lot of like, here's a Y2K inspo album, and it's a photo from like 2011 or something. Or I don't know. I've seen a lot of people do Y2K looks, and I'm like, people did not dress like this. Or the other thing we could say is like, if people did dress like the looks that they're doing, but no one's doing the shitty looks from the 2000s.
Well, yeah, that's what Michael was saying, right? That was the whole thing. Like, it's always like it's always the zeitgeist of that era. It's always the coolest stuff from that. Like, no one's reviving like Christian kid in 2002 wearing
something, an old discussion from the Discord that I was thinking about for this episode, the kind of Disney Channel core or whatever our friend
I remember
John
when we
Greenacre
were trying to do that,
but it's funny because I feel like in the episode I feel like, or not the episode, in the discussion I feel like most people were kind of pushing back against that, but I could now kind of see that happening in like 5 to 10 years maybe.
Well, okay, so I think we said this before too, and I know, don't worry guys, we're going to talk about specific menswear stuff, but what I think is interesting about this is I was listening to NIMFET alumni a while back, and I know talking about like Y2K, especially as it exploded, or the trajectories kind of projected from the pandemic, and it was about how like these teenagers and maybe college students who were forced to kind of stay at home, right, for 2 years or whatever, and lack that kind of like physical interaction in formative teenager and early adult years for college. Things got a lot more like sexualized in a sense, right? And not in like an overt way, but it's because like they just lacked, like the kind of like, I guess, like the prudish conservative thing that would maybe happen if you interact with someone and they'd be like, hey, that's a little too much. And so like, I think we kind of just bypassed the kind of wholesome Disney Channel part and went straight to like the Paris Hilton stuff of the era a little bit more, and kind of like rave, like, Y2K rave stuff, kind of like Lolita light, Japanese rocker stuff. But as I was gonna say, I think that maybe that's also hitting to a peak where it's a kind of peak sexy, and now we're gonna maybe it is gonna go to like the kind of more wholesome Disney Channel thing where it's still just as fun, still just as maximalized, but again more, I guess, family friendly.
I mean, we'll see. I feel like the other reason, and this is kind of maybe implied, but I think the other reason that the current Y2K look got popular instead of just wearing like a striped polo with like a white, like a white long sleeve tee underneath and like big jeans and fucking like Tony Hawk skate shoes. I feel like that didn't come back where, the Paris Hilton or like, early 2000s Brad Pitt, whatever the male equivalent is, did come back is because, or not Brad Pitt, Justin Timberlake is who I was thinking of. That came back just because it's cooler.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's also like most people will look at adults for inspiration and not children or like teenagers,
Yeah.
I do think the way in might be Hannah Montana. Because it's also about like who people think are cool and like would look up to, and I mean London Tipton's also iconic, but like Hannah Montana kind of like like that main character, female main character is kind of like like, oh, we loved her, right? And so like why not do that? And also again, Miley Cyrus still exists today, so it's kind of like, oh, I like that era of it. Again, this is not about predicting future trends, but kind of just seeing why people may find places ripe for inspiration. I mean, it overall, this whole thing is kind of like, well, maybe current culture is so, it's saturated. Like my pet theory was that, I think sometimes innovation, we don't know where innovation goes, and maybe people are distrustful of innovation, and so the thing to do is to look to the past for ideas and inspiration, and then you combine that with a modern curation or modern mind, to do whatever that's what results in like a 2024 does 2004 instead of just doing it directly. Although again, like I said earlier, like I think 2024 doing 2004 is probably like a lot. It's probably kind of accurate, even if it is just the zeitgeisty, the most popular.
Well, because that's also like recent enough that it's like super easy to still get that shit, and maybe it's getting harder now because like it's trendy and everyone's buying it up.
But yeah,
but I mean, it's like if you like even just a couple of years ago, like 2019, 2018 or whatever, you go to thrift stores, and that was all like 15, 20-year-old shit for the most part. It was a bunch of stuff from the early 2000s, and again, now I think a lot of it has gotten bought up or like like Goodwill like upcharges for everything now because they know how the internet exists and they know how much this shit is worth. But I still think it's pretty easy to build if you want to dress Y2K, it's still pretty easy to build a wardrobe of like entirely late 90s, early 2000s stuff.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, you're right there. I mean, it's interesting to think about when that stuff kind of runs out. I mean, maybe it's like the 2010s that is the cultural dead zone, but as I've written down here, maybe that's the next logical step for people to take.
I mean, I think I've talked about this before, at least in terms of menswear. I feel like I don't. Well, no, it's like, I don't know where this is going to go for like men's stuff, because I feel like the 2000s and 2010s was like so fucking boring in terms of menswear. Like, because, I don't know, people were, like, afraid of being called, like, fucking, like, metrosexual or whatever. So you just got, I don't know.
Yeah, menswear.
you just didn't get anything cool.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting because
at least like, in the mainstream, obviously in like fashion circles, people have always been dressing cool, but
it's gonna be it's gonna be like SLP designer stuff from the 2010s. It's never gonna be. I mean, classic menswear in general as a revival is never always like at the forefront. However, obviously we're seeing like people do 70s takes on men's on suits, but I think you'd argue that that's still cool. Obviously 80s, 90s, but Y2K, I think all of the suit looks with Y2K when kids would dress up like it when they're wearing a tie, I'm saying they do like the kind of like what ASAP Rocky I think did for the Met Gala a couple years ago, where it's like a security guard corps where like they wear a tie and button up, but they wear it with like some kind of like windbreaker.
Okay,
and it's like that's like the kind of like that's like their way in, because it's like that's like the cooler way of doing a tie, because it's like grungy, or well, not grungy specifically, but like like casual, not not overly formal, and it still leads away for like designer archivy or just like weird thrifted stuff, like again like a short, like a cropped windbreaker, dad jacket, whatever. I also remember when we called it dad jackets before and not cropped jackets. I remember that when before it became all about proportions, you know. But
Yeah.
I think people do like that as opposed to like wearing like a Y2K suit, because I think the issue that we're gonna run into, and again I want us to go back to the more revival part of this, but I think the thing is that even if Y2K and and maybe the early 2010s, or sorry, late aughts is coming in, or we are in it, I think people still are anti slim fit. Especially when it comes to like trousers, and stuff, and I feel like that will always be the pushback against, fully like the Ludlow suit coming into the fashion. Yeah, coming into fashion.
But at least for the next 10 years, because I don't know, slim fit is going to come back eventually.
Yeah.
I don't think we've reached the end of fashion.
Yeah. As much as Derek Dye Workwear and with Mark's the Status and Culture have said that, we might hit our end zone. I don't think they say that. They don't say that specifically, but I think it's like, because of how dead and how things are. Maybe we've reached the end of innovation in the sense. But I don't
it is
believe
going
that
to be
either.
really funny when like Wall Street Journal or New York Times or whatever starts writing the articles again. They're like, what the hell? Why are pants skinny now? And it's like acting like the first time that this has ever happened.
Yeah, it's just so funny to see all of the stuff kind of happen. But I think it's funny to think about, especially when you have like younger friends or people who are getting into it, because like they get into things because it's like trending, and then that's kind of like their way. And like, of course, guys like Jack or my TikTok friends who are like ask me about like classic menswear stuff, and then they end up finding really cool stuff, but like they get into it because TikTok was like, hey, this is like really cool. And I think again, like all of these things, right? It's about finding, an era, or in many cases, a subculture that of the past that you maybe not even identify with. You just think that you just think like, oh, that's interesting, cool. And you mine it for inspiration, And the thing I was saying earlier about innovation being skeptical, I think it's like, well, I think people can be burnt out from constantly trying to keep up, which is again a good thing, and so they go, well, maybe if I just go the opposite way, I'll find something in the past that I can do that's more accessible, and then I'll still think it's cool. I think some people maybe do that authentically. Sometimes people do that because, I can't get the current sneaker, but I can get a Doc Marten Adrian loafer, or something like that. That's more of a general trend. That's not really a vintage thing, but it does kind of pave the way to like again finding stuff. And I mean, to a certain extent, I think we have that, maybe not because we're just dissatisfied or we don't connect with modern society, but I do think that's a small part of it. Like the clothes that are being offered to me are not what I want to wear, so I naturally have to go back and find those things. It's the same reason, maybe generally speaking, of why people might make their own clothes and design their own clothes, but we don't we don't do that. We prefer to have it already made. Yeah, and so I think it's just kind of interesting for people to do that. And of course, like music plays a big part into that. Again, I think some people are skeptical of new music, right? Where they don't I don't want to listen to the top 40s. I want to listen to like the classics and
the bottom 40s.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the worst music that's coming out right now?
Oh man, it's the videos on TikTok that have 0 likes, and it's like a guy playing music. That's probably what it is. But yeah, I think obviously when you find music, music is such a big thing.
It's huge.
Hot
now.
take, but I mean, when you find it, like it can, it's such an emotional not piece of content, it's just an emotional thing that you can connect with, and it can also definitely lead into things like fashion. You know,
That's
it's
right.
not it's not like in a very general sense. It's not surprising that if you like '70s music, you may also like '70s clothing because you may also like '70s movies. You know, it just naturally goes that way. And I think if this is kind of related to how nostalgia cycles in music, which have also always been a thing.
Yeah.
Again, like jazz, swing music was really big in the night. I mean, Mambo Number 5. Come on, guys.
That's right.
That's not it's not swing, but it's
Yeah.
jazz or a form of jazz. You've got Leve currently right now, right? Like, I mean, kind of bringing back like a pop take on like bossa nova music and stuff like that, and like crooner ish. Well, I guess she's not really crooner, but again, like jazz stuff. And so, and it's not surprising that the people who people who listen to that may also maybe not dress '60s, but like have a kind of like a quirkier sense of things. They might revive certain ideas of it. And so, the way music comes back is no doubt related to how style comes back. Although, again, I will always think it's cool when people dress differently than their music taste. I think that's always so funny to me.
Yeah.
But of course, it still says something about you. Like, I might not listen to 40s music, but when you're like, oh, well, he listens to... Well, I guess, I mean, the Firebird by Stravinsky came out like 1910, and he kept writing music until like the 40s and 50s. So I think I do dress like someone in that time who would write that music. So, but yeah, it's all like super connected. And like I said earlier, I definitely think TikTok combining all these mediums, if people are into movies and that's how they get into like for us, right, or at least for you, Spencer, right, like you watch old movies and you connect with it that way. I think TikTok is like that for younger people, where like you just see a hot person looking like the 70s listening to 70s music and you're like, well, I want to be that person. And so then it's like a bite-sized version of a movie.
Yeah.
I guess that would be a Quibi.
I love bites.
I love biting.
Yeah. Yeah, has anyone ever made a streaming service that's all just quick bites? I feel like that would make so much money.
That's what TikTok is.
It definitely
Yeah.
wouldn't fold after like 2 years after making deals with.
It was like less than that. I think it was like less than a year. That would be so fun. Okay, imagine, I don't know when this episode is coming out. Maybe this will be old news by then. Imagine TikTok, the ban goes through or something and they're forced to sell to an American company, whatever.
Yeah.
They just rename it Quibi. They buy like the Quibi people. Who was it? It was the HP lady, right, who ran for California governor a while back, or Senate. Man, I can't remember this. Was it Katzenberg?
No.
No.
No, I'm not sure.
Quibi. Jeffrey Katzenberg and Meg Whitman.
Oh. Meg Whitman,
Yeah.
That's who I was thinking about, yeah.
Meg Whitman. So they buy it back and it's Quibi now.
Did you guys know that there is an OC original character called Quibi the Bandicoot?
Whoa!
Is that a Crash Bandicoot OC, or is it a...
Oh, and it's from DeviantArt? He does look like a DeviantArt thing. Oh, and it's spelled Kibby.
Kibby?
Yeah,
Kibby
and,
with a Q.
And he loves Loco Roco.
I mean, I love Loco Roco too. I don't know what that is.
When was this made?
Oh, this is a kid. It was made in like 2023. It was made last year.
Loco Roco is a video game.
Oh, and it was made. The birthday of the character probably echoes the person where it's 2002.
Yeah.
Like that's.
Yeah,
that's
this is a
me.
this
Oh,
is a kid.
this is a fursona. Is what we're looking at here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope this...
I mean, if they were born in 2002, then that's not a kid anymore. Yeah. So what I'm saying is fair game.
That's not what I was saying, but sure.
Yeah, I'm not saying that.
don't
making a
clip
joke.
that. Anyway, I think
Enough
it's good.
DeviantArt.
Leah, let's talk about like things that have come back. Let's finish this off by like I
Should we
think,
just
and
go
we can
through-
we can also like, well, yeah, we can go through it. We can just go through it. I was gonna say we can jump
Yeah.
around, but it makes more sense.
It makes
to go
more
through
sense
things.
to go through it. So, okay, so we started out this list just basically writing down as much as we remember. Because this is not a topic that people really write about that often, at least the specific angle that we're approaching it at. But starting out just with the 50s, which, like I said, was kind of the first time that secondhand clothing was worn as like a fashion statement. Or it's like, it kind of the first time that was happening like widespread. There were probably other revivals earlier than that, but I can't really think of that many. I gotta be honest.
We're not true historians here, okay?
No,
We don't
I was
know
like
shit.
racking my brain, like looking at photos from the 20s and being like, what does this remind me of? And I'm like, it's kind of the 20s. Like,
Well, I
don't know.
mean, I guess like kind of like rah-rah. I guess rah-rah suits were kind of like their own thing, but they also kind of have some weird elements of other stuff.
Yeah.
But that's kind of like I
That's-
feel like that's more of like fashion innovation or like novelty as opposed to like
Yeah,
a
that's
true
what it feels
revival.
like. So like new. That's the thing. Like that all feels really
Yeah.
like new. I think it's also just because the 20th century in terms of fashion was so radically different than the 19th century. Um, it was kind of harder to borrow stuff from that until, you know, we'll get into it, until like later it was like you're doing that to be the weird quirky guy. But anyway, as we said, the 50s, there was a big revival of teens and 20s stuff. Famously, the Teddy Boys over in England, which
Across the
is
pond.
short for, that's right, short for Edwardian Boys.
Tedwardian
wore-
boys.
That's right, Tedwardian. As the name implies, they were wearing a lot of Edwardian styles, so like bolo ties or cigarette pants, brocade vests, stuff like that.
Cigarette
But it
pants
was
meaning
also-
very drain pipe, very skinny pants.
Yes. But it was also, even if they were wearing like actual frock coats, which there are photos of Teddy Boys wearing like, you know, like long gamblers coats or whatever, it is still very 50s.
Yeah,
and
because
maybe
I
that's-
remember. Yeah, I remember reading something that it's kind of like Zoot, like a Zoot-esque take on those things. You know,
Yeah,
where,
exactly.
You know,
It's not really how like people wore that shit in like 1911 or whatever, but yeah, it's like a 50s version of that. And then I don't know. Like I said, in the 20s in America, you know, like or sorry, in the 50s in America, 20s clothing started to get popular, and stuff like that. Do we have any other thoughts on this era?
I don't know. It's
before
kind of
we-
hard yet because you know it's more easy discernible when you get later on when you can be like, okay, they're like reviving these kind of things.
Yeah.
At least get in the 50s. I mean, in the 60s, like a lot of hippies styles, kind of, you know, like, and again, like the late 60s, they kind of borrow from like 19th century stuff. There's a lot of like Romani influence in
Yeah,
certain things.
or,
There,
like-
kind of
like, you know,
cultural. I
some-
mean, cultural appropriation,
Yes.
definitely. That's what
But-
this is.
But yeah, then you start to seeing like a lot of Western stuff. I just watched I'm Not There, the movie about Bob Dylan, and so looking at a bunch of concert footage from Bob Dylan in the late 60s and early 70s.
Oh,
And he's
that's
got
right,
the
yeah.
whole fucking, you know, and this is like Bob Dylan specifically, not the wider American public, but you know, people were influenced by him and borrowed his stylings. He was wearing like straight up like cowboy shit and like top hats and shit like that.
Telescope crown stuff, right?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of stuff like that, or it's like, you know, the band collar shirts. Just kind of, yeah, like you said, like
Reviving
a lot of,
teens, like workwear kind of
yeah,
stuff.
and I mean, you could see that in like the art style, like the you know, the big groovy like hippie fonts that people think of. A lot of those were typefaces invented in like, you know, the 1890s or the early 1900s, used in a
Right.
lot of like Art Nouveau prints and stuff like that. Also,
right.
a lot of art from the 60s was inspired by Art Nouveau.
And also, again, I know we're not art historians either, but obviously, in, like just like music and fashion, art does revive things. I mean, the pre-Raphaelites, they were a movement that decided to do the stuff to revive drawings and the styles before Raphael did stuff. So that's kind of a big example there.
Yeah.
But once we get to the 70s, I feel like now, especially with men's, well, okay, I guess I just saw something before that, but in the 60s, you also kind of do get general Edwardian kind of redo stuff where like you get like 6-on-3 DB suits. Obviously
yeah.
slim fit
A lot-
stuff, like continental stuff. Even though it is very modern and different, you can still see some inklings of like 19-teens style and early 20s style silhouettes, narrow shoulders, like frog mouth pockets, boots. I mean, obviously, again, boots always been a thing, but like, you know, the kind of heeled boots that you would kind of see in the 60s. Also,
Yeah.
if you wanted to, you could make the connection to like, you know, 19-teen style,
and if-
you know, dress boots and stuff like that.
And of course, how could we forget like the fucking like velvet like Austin
Oh,
Powers like Roman
yeah, that's-
Polanski looks, where I feel like that's kind of
Those
like,
two people you can't.
well, listen,
I
he
know,
wore
I
an
know,
Austin
I
Powers
know,
suit to his wedding. That's a famous
I know.
photo.
That's I know.
Anyway, But
the velvet
I,
collars, yeah, very very teens. Like the
or like
Chesterfield
even
style
earlier, like I
stuff.
feel like I could see like Oscar Wilde wearing stuff
Oh
like that, you
yeah,
know?
puffy shirts,
Yeah.
man. Yeah,
Um,
that's really big.
mhm.
And of course, we could say a whole bunch of stuff about like about reactions to things right after the '60s is definitely a kind of like raining. I'm reining it in, people.
Yep.
I'm reining it in here.
I'm reining
Uh,
it in,
yeah, reining in
but
like the kind of like the wild, baggy, drapey cuts of the 40s and 50s kind of lead to the 60s. You could say that. I mean, I don't know how much of that is true, or actual evidence of things.
I mean, I
But
think
it
that's
does
pretty
happen.
reasonable. Like a lot of like
Well,
fashion
fashion
stuff
is a reaction just
yeah,
to
it's
what came
reacting
before.
to like other stuff. So it's like that's why skinny suits became a thing, is because certain designers were like, oh, I'm tired of men wearing all these
Wearing-
baggy suits, whatever.
Yeah.
So like old Mr. Tom Brown, Mr. Brown as I call him because
Mr.
I'm not on a
Brown.
first name basis. He invented the skinny suit, the first guy ever to wear a skinny suit, and then it became a thing. And then all these, I don't know who brought wide back, who brought the wide fits back this time.
This time, I don't know. I think it's just straight up like people just buying vintage. I think people
Yeah.
just because I think nowadays, right, designers are in competition with actual yeah, with archive, with just thrifters and stuff like that. That's where people are spending the money. Like that's a direct competition. I mean, maybe not direct per se. Like there's still a different type of market who will do that, and kids today obviously still will buy designer stuff because they can't find the vintage stuff.
Yeah.
But I think it's a thing of like the zeitgeist informing what designers are doing, and of course as designers are new or as they're young, they'll probably they'll be contemporary, etc. So it's kind of hard to say because people nowadays are kind of able to buy things independent of what the brands are telling them to.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a perfect statement to make, but I do think that's more applicable here than before, where you would just kind of see, oh, hey, this is what's offered at the store now. I guess we're doing skinny fit now or whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
Um,
but yeah, so then we
we-
got '70s. Oh, sorry, Spencer.
which
Go ahead.
I was gonna say we've talked about this a little bit, but yeah, the '70s, beginning in the late '60s and early '70s, like the '30s look came back. I not again to get too like sociological, but I wonder if that's because those were both times where things weren't always going super great in the United States.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like one, it was like because the other thing that you get in the '70s, which I think kind of lends itself to like the '30s style coming back, is everything gets a little bit more muted. Like you think of the '60s, there's a lot of like bright bold patterns and shit like that, and obviously that stays through the decades. But when I think of the '70s, I tend to think of more like browns and earth tones and stuff like that. Which is like more subdued or muted colors, which is also true of the '30s. And so, like obviously we've talked about all the different movies that came out in the '70s that are set in the '20s or '30s. This might just be specifically the music that I listen to, but I also kind of feel like the kind of like early folk music or like country or bluegrass that started to come back a little bit more in the '70s too. So again, I feel like it was a pretty big thing in the culture.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly how I feel about the '70s. I mean, I think it's also funny. Like I think we kind of said it before too. Is like what people forget about certain eras,
Mm-hmm.
and like how when '70s does '30s, it is. Well, it's also like kind of like it's kind of like not zeitgeisty, but kind of novel too, right? Like the '70s through
Yeah.
the '30s, it wasn't. I mean, intentionally, it wasn't conservative. It was like they're doing like the collegiate style suits with the.
Oh yeah. It wasn't
the,
a lot of times. It wasn't like, oh, we're gonna wear like the dark 3-piece like banker suits or like something that a lawyer would wear in gentleman's apparel or whatever. Gentleman's apparel.
Apparel arts.
Apparel arts.
Yeah, they're
I was
wearing the
combining
collegiate-
GQ and that, but
Yeah, they're wearing like the wide waistbands, the frog pockets, the multiple buttons on the waistband, flared leg openings, Patagonia
Yeah.
shoulders, pagoda shoulders, wide
we've-
peak lapels. Yeah.
And we've talked about like the big wide collars of the 70s. They don't really look like 30s like spear point shirts, just because the shape is different. But
yeah,
I
but
feel
they
like that
clearly are
definitely,
like looking at it. Yeah, and even like
yeah,
the style of like the ties. I think a lot of the stuff with the 70s is, it makes you wonder what would have happened if they didn't do it all in polyester, because that was like
yeah.
the hip new fabric,
It
Dacron.
was science
Um,
fabric. Yeah,
yeah, but
Ants.
like, because of that, you would do a lot of, like printed stuff on it. And so like a lot of like 30s designs of like these like kind of crazy deco-y multi stripes, Paisley's on stripes, crazy foulard stuff like that. Like, they were just done up, but in polyester with probably polyester lining, and so it's just a very thick knot, which again goes with everything else, right? All the other big exaggerated proportions. But you see a lot of that revival stuff happening, not just in the fact that they're wearing suits, but like like the details of the suits, and of course the details of like the shirts. I mean, the Sting is a good example of this, where they're not wearing true vintage, but
yeah.
you get like they're doing a pretty good job of dressing or styling as the 30s with 70s stuff. And if you look at some 30s stuff, especially the novelty stuff, you see these details come up. You see those kind of like shirts with like crazy weird deco stripes on the shirts, like this is weird, but like people wore those in the 70s. You see a lot of those 70s shirts at the thrift store, but you also see it in the Sting, where they would wear that with like a multi-striped tie and a three-piece
Yeah.
suit. So it's very interesting to see.
I think the other thing that we haven't really brought up from the 70s is after the 30s revival, there was also a big 50s 60s revival.
Grease,
Like
yeah, that's right.
yeah, American Graffiti,
Graffiti.
Grease, Happy Days, stuff like that. I don't know if that was as much reflected in the clothing. I like the
Yeah.
thing that I have written down here. The biggest thing that I could think of is like 70s like gay culture adopted
yeah.
a lot of stuff from the 50s. Like like the kind of leather daddy look is really inspired by
Yeah.
like
The biker
Brando in the
jacket,
Wild
the
One, or
jeans,
it's like
yeah.
well, I guess he was active in the 60s, but like Kenneth Anger, who did like Scorpio Rising and shit like that. Let me make sure that is the right name of the movie. Yeah, Scorpio Rising in 1963, which is very influential and has that like kind of 50s greaser look in it. But I don't know, Western wear, I guess I feel like there's a lot of similarities between some 70s Western stuff and 50s Western stuff.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, equestrian.
Like, but other than that, I don't know. Like, I might be off base here. I feel like there was not nearly as much 50s inspired clothing around in the 70s as there was the 30s stuff.
Yeah.
Am I right
Well,
here? Can you guys think of anything?
I can't think of too much there in terms of 50s clothing, but I guess like
Maybe
yeah,
like leisure suits, like
I
don't
yeah,
know.
like
Obviously,
as like a version
70s.
of a Hollywood jacket, but I always think
Yeah,
leisure suits. The more I look at them, the more I see more of like safari and like YSL doing like a like urban safari kind of stuff in that
uh-huh.
era, which is a bit less than a Hollywood, because a Hollywood jacket is not that. It's not workwear, even though it looks like a
Yeah.
short coat. It's definitely like it just goes like a casual, and it was made of like gabardine and wool and tweed and stuff like that. So it's,
I
but
mean, I'm
yeah, I
also just
can
thinking
maybe
of
see
like
it.
the actual like leisure suits that were
I
made in
also
like
think
the
about
40s
like
and 50s. But
yeah.
they do look different than 70s leisure suits, obviously. But the similar ideas there.
I'll also say this is also 70s also like one of the last few times we get fedoras. Like in like
Yes,
regular
that's
stuff. I
right.
mean, you get like the very like kind of I guess yeah closer to like the Raiders fedora, where like the proportions are just wild. You see that in a lot of like black culture outfits, and in a similar sense too with appropriation, you get that with like pimp outfits too in the 70s. You get that kind of
Hmm.
and it feels again like a very like 30s 40s gangster like aesthetic kind of that they're kind of doing
Yeah.
there.
Let's move on to the 80s
Yes, the
now.
80s. Now, of course, 80s time of excess, and obviously excess in clothing, because this is where you start seeing the 1940s proportions that have come back.
Hmm.
You could, of course, it's you get to thank guys like Ralph Lauren becoming popular, and of course, if you see Ralph Lauren in the early stuff, it looks very 70s. But of course, over time, as time goes on, it kind of becomes its more defined aesthetic, and it's like 80s and later on the 90s, wider fits. Of course, Giorgio Armani kind of combining 40s, well, not directly, but like doing 40s aesthetics or silhouettes with like a very minimal approach. And a little bit of exaggeration because again, like the jackets again are still a little bit longer, pants pull a little bit more, the shirt collars are fastened in an odd way. But yeah, you have a lot of that happening here. But what was also interesting too is you get kind of a little bit of like novelty stuff with it too. You get a lot of like the fleck fabrics, the Donegal tweeds kind of come in here. A lot of camp collar shirts in the 80s and 90s as well, but of course there's still like a couple of like modern stuff. I mean, you could say that the flock of seagulls hair is kind of a teddy boy haircut, kind of this exaggeration of like this
it's like a crazier version of that, of the like the ducktail haircut.
Yeah, yes, I get a lot of like skinny ties in the 80s kind
Yes.
of, and well, not
And I think
in youth culture, not or in like not necessarily in like kind of subversive alternative culture, as opposed to like the yuppie stuff, which has always been traditional like throughout this whole time.
I feel like other than like you have a lot of like musicians who were kind of intentionally wearing very square 50s and 60s stuff to like present a dichotomy or whatever. Like David Byrne kind of did this, but I've always thought it was interesting that in the 80s, at the same time that everything was so big, there was this kind of concurrent look, or maybe this was like a little bit later in the decade. Again, not a historian, especially not about post 70s fashion. But yeah, you got the really like pegged legs, like like super skinny jeans or whatever.
Yeah,
you got the skinny ties, but at the same time, I also feel like those were usually paired with like
a big jacket,
huge jackets and big shirts and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at like Miami Vice or like maybe not Rain Man, I guess kind of Rain Man, where like you would have like a 40s kind of style suit, but like the pants, even though they're pleated and kind of they're like mid-rise, they're not like super, and they're a little bit slimmer. I know like nowadays when I thrift stuff, because I always like finding pants, and as we'll get into later, the 80s 90s are a good dupe for certain things, but the thing that they kind of get wrong is that they do taper instead of going straight down, and 80s ones definitely get pegged. That's how you can tell you have an 80s one versus like a 90s pair of trousers. But yeah, let's go into the 90s now. I mean, 90s kind of fully sends up the 40s, It's not just proportions, it's like the ties, the shirts, the
I feel
spear
like
pointy stuff kind
when
of.
we watched The Player, I feel like that was super evident. And I'm sure that was like at least
intentional because of
semi-intentional,
like Hollywood, yeah.
Yeah, but it's like you watch that movie and it's like you change a couple things and it could be like a 40s period piece almost,
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of funny again to see like collar bars being such a thing, and crazy abstract ties. Something from like the 80s and 90s that you get, just like the 70s, they send up like 40s and 50s tie designs with like the very vertical abstract designs. Of course, the difference is like if they're fully lined and all that kind of stuff, and the type of silks and labels, of course. But they're pretty good dupes, and as we'll say later on too, like if you wanted to get into the 80s, or if you want to get into the 40s and 50s and you didn't want to buy true vintage, the 80s and 90s are still pretty good for that idea. And most guys do that. I mean, even like when you watch movies, and even in like regular days nowadays, when like an adult man tries to get into it, they'll wear like 90s clothing because it's like the closest. Because like, again, the swing revival, people wore those as stuff. You watch movies and people go on dates to swing, to dance, and you'll see guys wearing kind of like 90s 90s as 40s full on attire.
We need to talk about Swingers at some point, the Vince Vaughn Jon Favreau movie.
Yeah,
we need to talk about that movie.
So 2000s, you have 2000s has a very defined aesthetic. I think it's it's not. This is when you start finding where like the revivals really happen with like smaller subcultures who find certain things, and of course that happens throughout the whole thing. With like like especially with like musicians reviving stuff, adding stuff to their personal style. But in the 2000s, I feel like we're like mass consume, like where it's even more of a mass consumer thing, and so a lot of people are dressed in whatever is like the brands are doing, but in smaller subcultures like indie sleaze, you have a kind of like a 70s revival there.
Yeah, I always think of like the people copying like the Brad Pitt in Fight Club look, where he's wearing a lot of, it's like his character like shops at thrift stores. I get, well, spoiler alert, his character doesn't exist, but the stuff that Brad Pitt is wearing, he's wearing like 70s leather jackets with old Hawaiian shirts and shit like that. And I feel like if you look at photos of like the cool millennials, partying circa 2007 or whatever, you're going to see guys like that, or guys wearing like old, 70s Western stuff or whatever. It's pre-Macklemore thrift shop, thrift stuff,
There it is. Yeah, MJ just found it. Oh, it's
Yeah.
a knit T-shirt.
Oh, wait, let me find this.
Oh, it's just a printed T-shirt.
Yeah.
It's just
Oh,
a
yeah,
word.
there we
Yeah,
go.
But he is wearing 70s trousers
Uh-huh.
or 60s trousers.
But yeah, like that
with
kind of look, I
2000s
feel like
haircut.
definitely came book. Like that jacket, obviously it's a very 70s one. I feel like I've seen so many guys in the 2000s wearing jackets like
I mean,
this.
even this right here is like it's a 70s kind of outfit, but then with like 2000s bedhead hair kind of,
Yeah.
which is just really, really, really funny to see like this kind of combined aesthetics. I mean, again, it's always through like this kind of fun, but he's supposed to be like, he's just kind of this conglomerate of stuff. He's not just actively trying to send up things,
No, and it's like, he is doing a lot of stuff that I feel like most guys who were doing this look back then wouldn't do. Like a lot of the stuff he's wearing is like women's clothing or stuff that is like too small for him and shit like that. And he can pull it off because he's Brad Pitt in Fight Club, but
yeah. Just wait to see
it's
Brad Pitt in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Who boy, hot man alert.
Oh, there you go. But it's not something that you saw as like, I don't think there were many guys who were wearing like ladies' blouses or whatever to go out.
Yeah, I mean, hey, just wait till 2024.
Yeah.
There you go.
But
I did wait. We're 3 months in.
Yeah.
Almost
I mean,
4.
kind of a similar way, Kramer also kind of get a guy
Yes,
who's supposed
yeah,
to shop
yeah.
at a hip store.
Yeah, we didn't.
Thrift
Oh, yeah, we
stores.
didn't bring that up. But that's where
There's a whole episode. We did a whole episode on Kramer and
That's
John
right.
Feld.
But
So
I mean, we should say that the modern vintage scene kind of started in the 80s or 90s. Like we talked about the beginnings of it in the 50s, but at least, maybe I'm just thinking about the Southern California thing. But that was a really that was kind of a big thing in the 80s and 90s. And yeah, like we said on Seinfeld, a lot of the stuff that's Kramer is wearing is vintage from the 50s to the 70s.
yeah,
But yeah, he's wearing a lot of old leisure jackets, obviously a lot of Hawaiian shirts, like 50s or 60s trousers and stuff like that. Yeah, we did the episode. He looks cool.
yeah, it's a very defined look. But also in the 2000s, you get
Oh yeah, we got to talk
probably the biggest thing that changed menswear forever.
Mm-hmm.
Mad Men came out in 2007.
about this. That's right. Everyone met Don.
Yeah, Don
And everyone said,
Draper.
"I want to dress like him," including
they
me.
And including big brands like J. Crew,
J. Crew, Banana
and
Republic.
especially Banana Republic, because they are the ones who secured that partnership deal with them.
They
with
had the Mad Men line.
the Mad Men collection, baby.
Yeah.
And this was so iconic because it really brought back the skinny tie, skinny lapels, corporate attire, but also kind of had paved the way for like the kind of vibrance of 60s sportswear that we would then later see about 10 years later in the early 2020s.
Yeah, I something I've always thought is funny is I feel like now we haven't ever really left the 60s nostalgia, but we could just kind of moved along in real time with the styles of the decade. Because, like 10, 15 years ago, the big thing was, the early 60s look, where you would be wearing, like, the slim trousers with, like, polo shirts and a sport coat or whatever, or the skinny ties. But then people started getting into the late 60s, early 70s look, which has stuck around. I guess now we've gone, like, longer than the actual decade, but
It makes sense also where the people are more aware of things going on around the world. We have our own Watergates and Vietnam
exactly.
Wars, so.
But we're getting too ahead because I don't think by 2010 the late 60s look had really come back.
That's right. Yeah.
But now we're in 2011. so
Yeah.
we can talk about it.
Yeah, but yeah, the Mad Men thing was pretty crazy. I mean, yeah, that had the rise of the Ludlow suit, and you know, it's not just Mad Men, but like I think Tom Brown also Tom Brown not doing a revival thing, doing his own thing, the schoolboy look, but everything kind of just comes together and kind of creates this idea of like a '60s revival, in at least for menswear in that regard. Yeah, 2010s, you have more kind of nostalgia moments with like Peaky Blinders, Great Gatsby, kind of also mixing with like the rise of like indie folk and like kind of like workweary.
Oh yeah,
kind
yeah.
of stuff.
Like this is. I mean, I guess this is the more the 2000s, but yeah, like selvage shit, like denim, like raw denim shit like that.
Yeah, but
all the heritage workwear started coming around.
And so that combined with like maybe Mad Men and stuff like that, and sartorial stuff gives you like the hipster bartender, Peaky Blinders, Dapper Day, where you're doing kind of like you're trying to do like 2010s and 2020s stuff. Because again, slim pants, maybe you don't want to do Mad Men, but that'll also give you a good gateway to like again the 19 teens and 20s where slimmer trousers were more of a thing there. And of course those stuff you can still find like flat caps and kind of tweed jackets, and so the 2010s has a vaguely teens and 20s approach that, but it also leans again maybe not as like roaring 20s, but definitely more of like kind of like workweary, kind of more grungy.
I feel like you could say it was just kind of a general like, well, maybe I'm just kind of thinking of like musicians, like I'm like the fucking like Mumford and Sons, where their aesthetic wasn't really anything specific. It was just kind of an old-timey feel, and so I feel like that's kind of what the look was. It wasn't like, oh, I'm dressed like it's the 1930s or whatever. It's like I am just like old-timey,
Yeah. And so when you get to like the late 2010s and early 2020s, rise of TikTok, I think that's also kind of, we get to like the 90s a little bit in a sense where, and maybe again, this is we're not sociologists here, but like the rise of the internet back then, I feel like the TikTok was still so new to people and like such a new way of communicating and expressing things that maybe that's also why the 90s kind of came back. Grunge, and I mean, as from a silhouette standpoint, also makes sense, right? People are tired of skinny fit. Kids watching it don't want to be, kids seeing it, experiencing it, don't want to be their parents wearing skinny pants, and so they want to really feel like they're being different. And so and if they don't have access to designer clothing where you would see that stuff, like and some people do, some people in that has like the rise of archive where you find crazy designs and everything. But of course, if you're not educated in that regard, or you just don't have the access to it, you'll go to the thrift store, and what do you find? Baggy 90s clothing, and you kind of just start putting that together. You get, and then of course that just kind of hits everything else, right? 80s, 90s Armani as like the suit answer to like the kind of slim fit blue tan shoe real estate look. Like you go for that, it's minimalist. And then of course that also gives away the Y2K, maximalism, crazy stuff, kind of a little bit of sex appeal, rave culture, and all this stuff. But like again, now it all happens all at the same time. And as I talked about with TikTok, you get to connect with it in a holistic way as like a kind of like a pseudo snapshot of that time to kind of bring those together. And when it comes to classic menswear, I mean, I feel like classic menswear is always going to be a bit behind everything else.
I feel classic menswear has just kind of been stuck I feel like it just kind of, what we think of as classic menswear kind of like was codified in the 70s or 80s and just really hasn't moved much since then, I guess. I mean, I don't know. I feel like you could look at like looks from like Pity 10 years ago versus today, but if you're talking about the really high end, like fucking established stuff, I feel like that's been a pretty consistent look for a long time. But when you're looking at like influencers like Urban Composition, etc., you can definitely see like like the kind of like when they get into the 70s through by way of menswear, like kind of like bespoke 70s, and I'm not even talking about like sunglasses.
Like I'm not even talking about like doing the straight up Tommy Nutter. I'm talking about like when you wear your suits, but then you do it with JMM sunglasses, and you're like, now I'm doing 70s now, look at me. Nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying that it's kind of funny to see that, because you also see people doing Tommy Nutter, and you also see guys doing like of course Edward Sexton. And how could we forget that led to like the rise of like husbands, and of course guys like Maximilian Mogg, who's cool, the young, I mean, he's older than us, I think, but like this guy from Germany who's been doing that for a while, has been doing like 60s, 70s, YSL type of stuff. But yeah, I mean, you get husbands now. I think Factors in I forgot where they are, but that's an American one, kind of doing kind of like a 2020s 70s look. But you have all of that now. You have all this kind of like sex appeal, kind of breaking free of trad menswear, because you would have a little bit of it before. You would have like YSL suits, you had to have Tom Brown suits, but those were always like designer takes on classic menswear doing their own thing. But now you are getting dedicated, custom, high end stuff, being able to have fun, being able to be sexy. I think that there is, again, always a 2020s version of it. Like I think 2020s hair, 2020s type of sunglasses. I think like the chunky sunglasses. I think 70s sunglasses don't always look the same as what people wear today, but they just think big sunglasses are 70s, so it kind of just falls away. But it ends up, to me, looking like 2020s does 70s for that reason. Same thing with shoes. I think with shoes you might see more. If this was back then, you would have seen more like square-toed shoes, with crazy heels.
As we said, I feel like just the coolest stuff always gets taken, because what's funny is I feel like if you talk to most people who were alive in the 70s, like like my parents and stuff like that, anytime they always say that the 70s was so ugly, everything was so tacky, like, everything was so lame. But now I feel like the consensus among younger people is that everything was so cool. And again, like, I think it's, I don't know, again, like you were saying, there was a lot of really ugly stuff that we probably wouldn't like from the 70s, but we don't remember that. That's not something that we necessarily we're just able to kind of pick and choose what we like.
Yeah, I saw TikTok too, where like Marvelous Mrs. Maisel and all the other stuff. Like they always show it like everything is so new, but like in reality, like it would not be that flashy and nice looking in the 50s or 70s. Like they would own those things for sure, but they wouldn't be in that pristine condition each time.
Yeah.
They would be like a lived-in feeling that we're just kind of just missing from that thing. But of course, it's a movie. It's not like a documentary where you're just plopped in there.
You're not just plopped.
Yeah. But I think one of the biggest examples of this whole thing is like one good tangible example, because it's kind of hard to kind of figure out like how things move around, but especially in classic menswear where things kind of relatively stay the same. But I think the knit polo, I think, is a good example of like a more modern kind of revival thing where they did make knit polos forever, like in the 80s and 90s. You can see that, but they really popped. I mean, and also in the 60s too, and they kind of came back a little bit with the Mad Men revival, because I remember like being in the hashtag menswear and you would see some of that. But I think it kind of needed to go through the camp collar revival of like the late 2010s first. And what was interesting there is that like people knew it was retro, but also it was like a way to get like the rayon shirt, the unbuttoned thing, SLP look that you would see on like Harry Styles and other rockers from that era. And that and the thing is that they would wear camp collar shirts with like skinny jeans and skinny pants, and you see that with like moto jeans and stuff like that. And of course, the knit polo kind of came as like the refined answer to like the camp collar saturation. It looked more professional. And I remember reading in an article with GQ kind of by Jake Wolf, kind of detailing the rise of this. Like it does give people more of an opportunity to play with texture, because knit polos have texture versus like a rayon camp collar shirt. And that of course then leads to the like fun designs you would see on knit polos, which I guess now is translated to like sweaters and like cardigans, where you have like a whole like scene or whatever painted or stitched, I guess, woven into knitwear. That's definitely a 2020s thing, like a bacon and eggs sweater that's like woven. That's a very 2020s thing to do. Come on, bring back like Thunderbirds and Eagles and like really cool
please.
Western stuff. That's what I want.
I feel like the knit polos also started getting big around the same time that like, people were rewatching The Sopranos or whatever, that kind of came back culturally.
That's right. Yeah.
And also at the same time where like, guys who weren't into fashion were just like, I'm gonna start wearing fucking tracksuits and gold chains everywhere because people just wanted to look like a
Yeah.
mobster or whatever.
And then when you want to dress up, naturally the knit polo would be the thing you would wear instead, like,
Yeah.
instead of the tracksuit.
And now we're at the point where that this shit is sold at like H&M or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like you could probably go to Uniqlo or H&M or something. Banana Republic definitely has to have
I
something.
mean, yeah, I
right?
mean, everything is kind of catching up, and I guess that brings us to our final section here about, like, brands that kind of do this, or that are. I mean, there's been so many menswear brands that are created for this thing. I mean, you could maybe call it repro. Obviously, I think that the repro kind of implies some kind of like just cheap, the facade like reproduction of things. So I think there's a lot of brands that do it in a good way. Like obviously Double RL is predicated on this idea. Some of the stuff is repro, some of it is Ralph's take on those things. You got stuff like, I mean, Scott Frazier is built on nostalgia, right? It's
Yeah.
built on this, like, like Hollywood waist trousers, peg trousers, wide leg trousers, with like knit polos, knit shirts, camp collar shirts that are in that same vein, with like modern fabrics or even like modern versions of those fabrics. You'll see a lot of like Donegal tweed and like crazy multi-stripe knits and panels of linen, etc. Of course, you got Mr. Freedom, LVC. stuff
Oh
like
yeah,
that, too.
yeah. Which I
do
feel like
this kind of stuff.
that came out of like the kind of like heritage workwear stuff in the 2000s that we talked about. But yeah, they're still around. It's fun to look at brands like that and see how their look has changed. Because I feel like, I don't know, I haven't seen the most recent Mr. Freedom collection, but I remember if you look at their old stuff, it's all like fucking like crazy over-engineered like denim and like like leather stuff or whatever, all very rugged, very like military. And obviously Mr. Freedom still does that, but I feel like their newer stuff is a lot more minimal. I remember they had like a collection of just kind of collegiate style stuff, 60s collegiate style, that was all just like windbreakers and OCBDs and like chinos or whatever.
Yeah.
Where they've even though they obviously have their own thing, they've also kind of stuck with the times. And LVC isn't around anymore, unfortunately. But you could do the same thing. Looking at the different themes of their collections.
Yeah, I think one of the recent ones I included was like a soapbox race of the 60s or whatever.
Yeah, and then they had the whole like 70s like reggae collection, which I think is one of the cooler things that they did.
Yeah, they also have like a jazz one too, a jazz musician one as well.
But yeah, you look at a lot of like early LVC catalogs, and it's all like 40s, 50s greaser stuff or whatever, kind of what you associate with like jeans and Levi's or whatever. And so that's kind of fun to see the evolution through these already nostalgic brands.
Yeah, it's kind of fun to see like designer takes on those things. I mean, Thomas Farthing as well, I guess. But specifically with Levi LVC, you have an archive, and I think that's also kind of a thing where brands recognize the draw that their archive or the past has, and so they do either archive, like where they sell off old, like their actual vintage stock, or they just revive it by making it again.
Yeah.
Obviously, like, I mean, I think Ralph Lauren might have done some stuff like that, but of course, like J Press doing some stuff like that. J Crew kind of reviving some old 80s, 90s designs there. And of course, with archive collections, J Press did it with Wooden Sleepers. They sell off their archive stuff. But yeah, of course, you still have like the menswear stuff where nostalgia is again baked right in. Of course, stuff like Ivy inherently has like a predilection for 60s stuff already. Jake's, Mercer, J Press all feels like 60s because that's the entire thing. That's when trad was kind of codified. And of course, Brycelands, which is not codified but like has like kind of like a really cool take on stuff. They have like they do a 30s kind of reproduction design, but then they do it in like a Madras. They have like a 30s sawtooth shirt, but they do it in Madras. They do it in chambray. That's really, really cool. Of course, they have like the rayon shirts that they do in like different fabrics that are more fun. And sometimes contemporary doesn't mean like modern in the sense of like this is like today, but like it's like fabrics that might not have just existed back then, or like patterns that they might not have done. Although with the amount of clothing that's out there, I'm sure someone has done like a diving rayon shirt or like having these novelty prints of things. But yeah, I mean, even most recently, Eddie Bauer did a repro. Like like Buck Mason did a repro of an Eddie Bauer jacket.
Oh, there you go.
And
Yeah.
so you have stuff like that. You have some people like reviving LLB and stuff. I mean, people, different Japanese brands, the Japanese market has its own take on like they really love to repro and recreate things. But Japanese people, Japanese designers doing like the LL Bean sport vest, a kind of weird niche garment being revived
Yeah.
in that way. Um,
And we thank them for it.
yeah, that's right. But yeah, we'll see how things keep going. I mean, I think 2010s might be the next era, but I don't know. It's hard. I mean, I'm from that era, so it's we're having to think of like it just looks so ugly with the stuff. But I'm curious to see if that happens.
Because like again, like I feel like people are getting their stuff from like a lot of like red carpet things, and if you look at most red carpets from like 2007 to 2012 or something, it's all bad. Like in terms of the stuff that the men is wearing, and not even like, oh, you could do a cool take on this. I feel like it's all just pretty boring, but we'll see. What do I know? Really quick, is the like the MFA basic bastard look kind of a 2010s version of a 60s look?
You mean like the fatigues and white plimsolls,
or just like the chinos and white sneakers and like an OCBD with like a windbreaker or something.
Yeah,
I feel
mean,
like that's basically like a modern version of like 1964.
Yeah, I mean, but that's like the whole thing, right? Like that. I mean, with the classic menswear, the reason why this is kind of tough to do with the classic menswear is because like nostalgia, heritage, classics is inherently baked in. So like you can't.
Yeah.
It's intentionally taking similar ideas and taking them with modern stuff. So instead of deck shoes, it was a Nike heel shot, right? Like it's instead of like a World War II trouser, it's a World War II chino. It's like a fucking J. Crew chino, right?
J. Crew perfect chino, whatever.
It's just that. But of course, you still want the fleece. Or sorry, the lamb's wool sweater. Shaggy dog, kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, what do we? How about you guys? How do you incorporate this stuff? I mean, no, like I think we already know 2010 is going to come back. Minimalism, maybe, I don't know. It's hard to tell, especially if everything is coexisting. But I think as I looked at it, I don't really have a lot of repro stuff because I just have, or not repro, like revival stuff, because I just straight up own those things. Though I guess you could say I own a lot of like 90s to 30s like shirts, not the ties, because I do not like thick ties, but I do the opposite where I I wear my 80s I wear my 30s and 40s ties, and they look 80s and 90s because it's all geometric. I mean, it's all yuppie stuff anyway. So there's some stuff like that. But of course, you also have, I didn't talk about this before, but like guys like Kenji Kaga from Sevenfold Forenzi, who do like kind of crazy tie designs on silk that look like 30s brocade ties, and that's kind of another example of like a revival, maybe not like a cultural thing, but just like they like those things and they want to make their own versions of those, kind of like a husband's thing where your whole thing is based on that. And so I guess I have stuff. Yeah, in other words, I do have a lot of things that kind of just work through any era I want, because I tend to have those items that haven't really changed too much. Obviously, that answer to that is just trad menswear, like Spencer says, that hasn't really changed. But Spencer, you have some.
I do have a couple. Like 70s do 30s jackets. Both of them are belt backs. I don't know. I do kind of wear those either as, like, I don't know. I go back and forth with those. Not like, not like, I just feel like I can wear them to look 70s, or I can wear them to look more 30s, which is fun. But that's really the only thing I do, because like you said, a lot of the things I just own the originals, so I don't need to necessarily do the reproduction version. And if I'm mixing eras or whatever, it's usually because like I want to look like a guy from the 70s who's wearing vintage, which to him would have been like stuff from like 30-40 years ago. So I'm not like trying to take 70s stuff and make it look 30s. I'm just kind of doing the opposite of being like this outfit is a guy in the 70s who's wearing something from the 30s.
Yeah. Yeah, that's... we just make the excuses for ourselves so it works. The aesthetic just makes sense.
It just makes sense.
Yeah. MJ, any thoughts before we close out here?
I don't know. I'm just excited to consume more inspiration, I guess.
That's the best part about this, right? I think that what's really cool is that, when I talked about TikTok, like I think that really helped open up some of my ideas. As someone who's been a part of the internet and I enjoy being chronically online, but I do, as someone who likes music and holistic presentations of things, TikTok has really been influential. Maybe again, not for me to buy necessarily new things each time, but to kind of see more what I can do for my wardrobe, and that combined with the vintage education. Not a formal education, but one just based on being an enthusiast, has helped open up the possibilities on my of my wardrobe, and so I think I do find revivals kind of interesting in that way. And as I've said before in the Ethan style episode at the end of last year, sometimes it's good to be anachronistic because that just means that you just exist outside of time, and when you do that, it just
and
makes
you'll never
everything...
die.
And you'll also be able to kind of pick and choose. And the good thing about classic menswear, at least with the taste that I have, I'm not saying that I'm the best, but it's easy to kind of when things come back, it's easy to just straight up do that. Again, like, oh, well, this foulard tie also looks kind of 70s, or these long collars look like this or whatever. I mean, as you guys know, whenever I do like a going out look that's kind of geared towards the 70s, I'm still wearing like a 40s camp collar shirt. But and in the 70s, it wouldn't be a camp collar. You'd still have a dress shirt. You'd still have a collar band on there. But I just don't do that. But of course, regular people won't care, and I don't care. So I just wear my 40s shirts because I get to get more wear out of my 40s shirts. Spencer does the same thing. So
yeah.
Exactly.
It helps. It helps
think
to pair the like actually doing it and then being able to think about it more technically, I guess, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Because you get to I guess express it more in like hard terms than just kind of it's inspired, or it's like just vibes.
Yes. Yeah. I definitely agree. I mean, and I know a lot of people will have an issue with this about it not being authentic, but I think at the end of the day, like, this is not supposed to be authentic. Like, people aren't trying to... I mean, I guess maybe nowadays it might be seen more as that because of how accurate it can be. But I think a lot of people have an issue with menswear revivals because of like, oh, it's inauthentic, whatever. But that's the whole point of it. It's showing how people showing the new ways of how people connect with things. The idea that these kids who have never seen an 80s movie, or who maybe like not never seen, but like who did not live through the 80s, are able to kind of do it is such a fascinating thing. I think that is really, really cool, and it gives you new ideas, even if it is a facsimile of what the 80s was. And that might be offensive to people who did grow up in the 80s, but I think it's still a cool idea. But again, ask me that when people start dressing like the 2010s. And, but again, I'm sure everyone has seen the edit of people people doing like there's like an old like 2012 high school video, and people are like that's gone viral plenty of times. And I remember before when I did it, it was kind of like just like, oh whoa, we look so like that's like such a young time. But nowadays people are like really like they wish that was like where they were, and like they want to dress like that, and like that's crazy, bro. But yeah, ask me again if I still think it's cool when people start appropriating my, I don't know, like Millennium Falcon Target T-shirt with,
There you go.
But the thing is, people still dress like that. That's the kind of the aspect that.
Yeah, it's like I don't know. I was gonna say it's like maybe what's gonna come back is like the intentionally retro Dr. Pepper or Sriracha shirts or whatever that you get at Target. But
were those people cool? Were the people who wore those cool?
No, absolutely not.
Who's the cool? That's what I'm saying. Like, it has to be like true, like indie sleaze, but also like hipster, like Joseph Gordon-Levitt kind of stuff. What was
the coolest person in 2011 wearing? Hold on, let me look up
Joseph Gordon-Levitt. It's gonna be whatever that is.
Gordon-Levitt 20. Let's just do 2012. So he was wearing, I mean, just the skinny ties with the vest and all just fucking Mad Men shit. How about, let's see, Let's see what The Weeknd looked like in 2012. Maybe this is what's gonna come back. Okay, so here's The Weeknd, and he's got like denim cutoff jacket. He's got a fatigue thing. Maybe it's just all black T-shirts and then slightly interesting jackets.
Oh yeah, okay. I see an interview with Joseph Gordon-Levitt for Lincoln 2012, wearing a brown plaid shirt with a skinny like dark brown or black tie. And here's the thing, the thing with all of this stuff is that it's never like inherently bad. I just don't like the fit of things. I would wear a plaid shirt with a dark tie if it was a spear point collar, the fit was bigger, and the tie, wasn't polyester or whatever. That's the whole thing with this, I just want it to be good. I do this now. I love wearing plaid shirts. Everyone knows this.
Yeah,
but what about dark navy suit, black polka dot shirt, black slim tie? That's a more inherently 2010s outfit.
Okay, here's
this right here.
This I could see something like this coming back where it's again, people might still be dressing like this.
That's the whole thing.
No, like this where it's like it's Lupe Fiasco and he's got like a Bulls jersey with like fatigue pants or whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe sports jerseys and shit like that are gonna come back. I'm just looking up like rappers because I feel like that is also where a lot of the inspiration comes from. They were maybe a little bit more fashion forward than Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
Culture. Yeah, but I guess from a menswear standpoint, right?
Yeah,
that's true.
But as people get younger, and
people get younger, right? We're all getting younger, folks.
Just like us.
As the new generation takes over both in covering culture and making culture, it's interesting to see more of a not populist but more of like a pop culture aspects of it kind of like be introduced, right? Like that's why we've seen a lot of casualization of menswear, right? The people working at GQ are not all Bruce Boyer types. They're all like young guys who are like ex-sneakerheads who are like writing about. I mean, Throwing Fits, good example of how they've affected classic menswear. I mean, that's more than a menswear revival, but like the things that they like, they'll bring into this culture, and some of it will be nostalgia of stuff that they find nostalgia for,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you see like guys wearing like band tees with suits. That's kind of like a big thing. That still happens today. That continues to happen today, I should say. But
right.
Thank you
for
all
happening, folks.
Yeah, well, thank you guys for listening to this episode. I know it's a little bit of a long one, but hopefully it was interesting discussion for you. I certainly had a lot of fun talking about this.
I had a blast.
Brain blast.
I had a brain blast.
Talk about Jimmy's mom. Jimmy's mom. little Carl Weezer for you. Ultra Lord.
Maybe
that's
people will
Sheen
dress like
Estevez.
Carl Weezer or Sheen. Maybe that'll be the look that comes back.
Yeah, I feel like that actually might happen. How about when will people dress like the Big Bang Theory? That's crazy. That's the real one.
The Green Lantern T-shirts
with the long sleeve undershirts, baby.
Yeah.
Also thanks to our Discord who helped frame some of this stuff, who sent over some great ideas, as well as the Facebook group. If you guys want to help jump into the discussion, you can go to patreon.com/Style and Direction. $5 a month gives you access to our Discord where our discussions happen. Also talk about life. We're also friends there. Oh boy. And
there we go.
Also, it gives you access to our library of bonus episodes where we talk about movies, talk about nostalgia and connecting, a holistic visual experience with clothing. We talk about movies on there, stuff like Back to the Future, nostalgia movie right there, straight up. $5 a month. $10 a month gives you all of that, nothing extra, but we do thank you personally by saying your name at the end of each episode and each blog post. So MJ, who are we thanking from our sad canast FNAF?
William Afton.
William Afton, I always come back, baby. MJ, who are we thanking? Who's our sad cast Fanaftics?
We're thanking Shane Curry, Philip Gregard, Henrik Wilberg, and Alexander Batten.
We appreciate you guys so much. More episodes to come. Keep giving us these ideas, baby. We'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.